So without further delay, it's my pleasure to introduce all of the members of our next panel, beginning with, from Improved, the partner, Dominique Houde. Dominique, hello. Come on out. So also on stage with us from the Mobility House is the Managing Director, Markus Fendt. Markus, hi there.
Hi, Marianne.
And, you know, we said that this is a fully hybrid event, and this is true because we have two panelists joining us virtually from Wallbox Chargers. I hope we see him in a moment. We have the Director of Corporate Development, Austin Wood. I guess we'll see him in a moment. We have another, there he is. Oh no, that's Tom Lowers from Allego. Hello to you. Oh, and there's Austin Wood on the other side. Markus was blocking the screen for me, but everybody's there. And last but not least, from Virta, the CEO, Jussi Palola. Jussi, hello. So, I'll sit here. You can sit there. So, it is a little bit more challenging to have people in person and people on the screen, but we're going to do the best that we can. Can the other virtual panelists hear us? Just double checking, just nod, thumbs up. Excellent, excellent. So everybody, we're going to talk about the funding journey. And before we get started with our conversation, just to kick off the topic, Dominique is going to share his views on how e-mobility players can reach the required scale that they need through careful financial planning. Very important. So Dominique, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So let's go. So thank you, Mariana. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I think what we will discuss today is really how we see the financial structures of companies in the sector going forward, especially in view of the incredible scaling up and increase of the size of the sector that we are seeing. And in fact, I know that the official theme of the conference here is eMobility 2025 on the verge of mass adoption, but we're going to modify that a little bit. We're just going to adjust the title for eMobility 30 mass adoption.
Right?
Yes.
To get ready.
Exactly, because I think in financial terms, what we see is that to be able to carefully plan for the medium term, it just takes some time. So 1 or 2 years is a fairly short amount of time, not necessarily to raise money, but from a structural point of view to think about where you want to be. So I think we want to take that in consideration with the kind of growth that we will see. And I think that is maybe representative of what we see coming in the next few years. I'd like to say a couple of words about Improved, which is a corporate finance boutique very much focused on mobility, including e-mobility, energy transition. And present here, there's myself, there's also Sharif Rahim as a director. And I think we have been involved for a few years. We have more than a team of 20 deal makers in the sector and more than 3 billion euro of volume completed with a lot of the e-mobility transactions. And in addition, we have several industry mobility experts, more than 10 of those that are either ex-board members of large companies or C-level with a lot of operating expertise. So that's Improved. And importantly, we have been present in your sector here. We have been involved in many of the transactions, most often raising money, Series B, Series C, sometimes larger, but also M&A situations. And we can see here some of the recent transactions where we advise, for instance, a recent one being the sale of a Vericity to ChargePoint or EcoTap to Legrand, and I think some of them even involving some of the people on the stage here when we raised some money from the Mobility House with Mercuria, a large energy trader, and also one even before with Singapore Power Group. So I think from us, we have seen, therefore, the sector moving quite a lot in the last few years with a lot of different transactions, with different trends, and I think that's what we're going to discuss. So I think what we see is that the sector that we have going forward is not just growing incrementally. We sometimes think, okay, it's maybe 30%, 20% per year. That sounds like a positive but comfortable growth rate. I think what we see is really instead a complete change. I think we have a major transformation taking place. And I think companies and their financial structure, at least those who want to be the leaders, have to be ready, because we're not looking again at those type of multiples only on an annual basis. So when it comes to about the next 8 years, we're looking the expanding of the matrix that you use from 9 times to even 20 times of growth, which really calls for much, in a way, larger and well-equipped companies financially to follow the size of the market, whether you're looking at the global electric fleet, the global number of connectors, and importantly as well, the energy, because regarding the number of cars or chargers, you have larger batteries, you have more powerful chargers, so you're looking at more than 15 times energy from 6 terawatt today to 86 that will be dispensed in 2030. And this will bring us to 12 to 15% of all passenger vehicles globally electric. We have a higher number for the Western markets, about 20%, but globally you have 10 to 15%. So that means that there will be a lot of annual capital as well required for electrification of transport, including the infrastructure, which is a lot that can go from 100 billion to 700 billion per year. And we see similar numbers in what is required for as well grid flexibility of resilience, which is a very important consequence of all this charging which we see. And I think the growth of the sector has been, if we say, operated several times. We've seen that on the solar forecast that have been increased all the time. We've seen it in the wind forecast. So the same actually applies to EV charging forecast. So we have seen that in the stock markets. I think quite often the stock market will tell us a bit what is a general perception of whether something, what is the probability or the perception that things can be long-term scalable and profitable. And I think from April 2020, we have seen that there's been, of course, quite a disconnect between ESG type of investments and the general NASDAQ, and that is expected to go in the right direction with the sector scaling up. And I think maybe to conclude is that it's important to understand that to put in place the financial structure that can accommodate this really significant growth, there is a lot of different structure that you can consider. You can look, for instance, at and this is illustrative, so not all companies are the same. They may have different requirements, but the complexity over time can grow quite a lot. So I think initially, looking at the initial company, you sometimes have a venture capital or angels funding the company. That can evolve later on when a company is a scale up, sometimes by more venture capital, sometimes corporate in the form of venture or direct investment. You see that. And then you see people positioning themselves as market leader in certain areas, adding, for instance, an infrastructure investors. And that maybe is more applicable to companies who need to deploy capital. Either that you want to have an asset co because you run networks that are asset heavy, so you want the capital to do that. Or again, from a point of for doing charging as a service, you want to have a pool of capital on the side where you can sell, increase your market share, and have that element being funded effectively. So I think the infra investors can play quite a role these days, either by owning companies as a platform company, also by being on the side to help the market deployment of certain companies. And I think if you go to the next stage, effectively, or an additional layer, is the one when you have public investors involved in companies that can become public and have access to that source of capital. I think we have quite a few companies on the journey there. There has been recently a lot of SPAC companies or even normal IPOs. And I think this is going to be really the topic of the next few years, to see that in order to grow on this 10x, 15x, 20x, I think those who want to be market leaders, who want to be among the parts of the market that is really concentrated, I think this will have to be considered really quickly because it takes quite a few years to really put in place. And I think we see here as well the typical check size, effectively, of those sources of capital, which can also vary a bit from those amounts. So I think this is what I wanted to mention today. I think we have an interesting debate, of course, with people coming from different perspectives here in the panel. And I would like to conclude by highlighting that at Improved, we can certainly help you in relation to the full package of all these sources of capital that are available and how to navigate through them, to all the nuances of scaling up at the right speed when it comes to the financial side of it. And we have, of course, our team that is ready at Improved to help you. So very good to speak to you, and looking forward to the rest of this panel.
Thanks a lot. I think it's just really interesting how you showed us how the forecasts can be very wrong or revised time and time again, especially comparing it to the forecast for solar and wind, and how there is a clear acceleration, so forecasters have to readjust every couple of years. Do you see that likely also for electric mobility? I mean, I only trust the statistics that I fake myself. Was that Winston Churchill, or I don't know who said that, but there's some sources that claim we're going to see 30% of all cars electric by 2030. So do you expect these forecasts to be upgraded again? I'm curious to hear from the others, maybe. Let's start with our virtual panelists, because we just want you to feel closer and hear your voices. So, who would like to begin? It's a bit tricky. So maybe Ton.
I'll go. Yeah.
You're right next to me on the screen, at least.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't feel like that. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
But anyway, good afternoon, everybody. I think what we've experienced is that we keep also adjusting our forecasts time and time again. And currently, we also work with that 30% that you also mentioned. And I think that can even increase further if both, let's say, local governments or European bodies will keep on pushing on the regulatory side, because that's what we, of course, also see happening, especially also post-COVID or during COVID. So yes, it could well be. And it's, I think for us, it's also something to keep in the back of our minds, to be flexible with whatever forecast we work with, especially now, going public in the next couple of months. So that's we keep a constant eye on the developments in the market, and yes, I think quite frankly, we expect that to grow even further.
I see Austin nodding also on the screen, so greetings virtually to you.
Greetings.
Did you want to add something about these forecasts? Will they have to be readjusted? How much do you think they'll have to be readjusted?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when you look at the forecasts, they're constantly being adjusted, and the analysts are constantly updating what they've said, even months prior, right? One of my favorite facts and kind of jokes is that coming out of coronavirus last year, if you looked at the predicted EV sales, the Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which is one of the highly regarded news sources that we have in the EV industry, said that, hey, Europe is going to only sell about 700 electric vehicles, or 700,000 electric vehicles, right? And we ended up selling about 1.4 million, right? So that poor analyst, whoever he or she was off by about 100%. And even just, even recently, right? They released their new, the electric vehicle outlook for 2021. In June, they were predicting that the world would sell about 4.7 million electric vehicles. They just released their Q3 outlook, saying they're upgrading their forecast to 5.6 million. So it seems like the stars are aligning for our industry, right? The EU has proposed the Fit for 55 plan. The USA, luckily, has changed administrations. Not to make this political, but it is great for the EV industry. And China just renewed their subsidies coming out of coronavirus. So I think definitely the major actors are trending in the right direction for our industry.
Yeah, you see?
One of the topics I see that, of course, behind the prediction of EVs to the market, that is much deeper details, like what is the impact in the energy, because there's many unrevealed changes. If we consider, for example, 13 million EVs on the road of Europe 2025, it means practically around 140 gigawatt of rated power when these cars are charging. So, and as a benchmark, I come from Finland, and there's a top. We have a coal there, and the top usage of electricity is 15 gigawatts, to top notch. So meaning, in a couple of years, we will have, let's say, 8 countries more capacity in EV charging coming to the network. And these kind of effects are behind the numbers. So we can discuss whether it's 20% more, but the really big changes, disruptions are I would say the bigger thing which are unrevealed for the moment, it will impact industries. It will impact in the oil industry structure, energy industry structure, automotive sector. So really big changes are there, and they are not like 20-30% type of changes. They are disruptive.
I can just agree to Jussi, because so far when we had interruptions in the renewable industry, we could just lower the kind of the subsidies, and then solar dripped down again, or wind was not expanded. But with electric mobility, if it's 10x or 15x, you can't stop that anymore, because Volkswagen will change their plans. There is no way back. There will not be any diesel car anymore in the past, in the future, like in the past. So, and this, what you said now, will influence every sector. We need much more electricians to install that stuff. We need much more charging stations all over the place. We need to integrate it smart into the electrical grid. We need to make it bidirectional. We need to make use of the storage into the energy system. And the key is not, I think, money. We see players like Improve. They make sure that young companies like we get the money. The key is now to grow and adapt regulation to it, because now everybody, every sector has to understand that and adapt to it.
I think a few years ago, if somebody, I think I can remember actually, maybe 6 years ago, somebody saying there's not going to be any more diesel cars on the road, and it was like there was such a, it was like such a shocking, revolutionary thing to say, and now all of us sitting here like, yeah, of course, and, you know, like in the future, there are not going to be any diesel cars on the road, and it's incredible what a mind shift there's been in such a short time. I mean, it's a revolution, not just on the roads, it's also a revolution in the minds of people, which is also very important. I actually wanted to pick up on what Austin said to ask Dominique. So Austin was describing his experience with analysts kind of struggling to adjust everything to, you know, forecasts that are constantly being updated. So as a financial advisor, how do you experience this situation?
Yeah, I think from our side, we see it maybe from a different way. I think what we see, of course, is that because as you have these numbers coming in even more positively, and a clear recognition that the market is taking off and there is a significant future, I think what you see is that the risk profile is changing, and then the categories of investors coming in are adjusting to that, because certain investors maybe say, you know what, I can take not too much risk, but I can bring a lot of capital and look at and invest this longer term. So with the reduction of risk that we have seen in the last few years, we have seen, for instance, the infrastructure investors coming quite significantly in many ways, in a way that might not have been possible 5-10 years ago. And a good example is, for instance, with looking at virtually at Ton here, Meridian, the large French infrastructure fund, decided to purchase effectively 100% of Allego to make it a platform company. And then you had some really good examples as well, infra funds, more standing on the side of companies to provide them, to help them to deploy capital in sharing the risk in a way that works. So I think that seeing this is really this growth, this I would say incremental growth, as being really accompanied by new type of investors investing differently in the market, also including the public markets, which is one of the large developments I would say of the last 18 months.
So something else that has been in the focus of debate about the future direction of the e-mobility market is, are we going to see more fragmentation? Are we going to see more consolidation? Is there going to be lots of smaller, different players, or is everything going to be concentrated into 4 to 5 global leaders? How do you see this developing? Maybe we can start again with Austin.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I don't know if any of us can predict the future. I wish we could, because it'll certainly be interesting to see how all this plays out. But, you know, looking at how things have evolved for different types of companies in the past, I think, you know, there will be regional leaders with a few global players, right? So if we look at the European market, there tends to be a handful, you know, 1 or 2 major leaders per country. There's a handful of I'd say there's only a couple of pan-European players. You look at the USA, and obviously ChargePoint is the first name that comes to mind there. I think they announced that they have something like 75% of the market share in the USA, with the next closest competitor having about 12%. And I think they're a great example because they were first to the SPAC market. They've already done 2 acquisitions, right? One of which I know the Improved team advised on. So, I think that's just an indicator that the markets are going to consolidate for the players that move quickly, right? And that's why I think so many of us are raising the capital that we are today, so that we can be those consolidators, so that we can be one of the top leaders within our region and hopefully globally, right? That is definitely Wallbox's ambition, is to be one of those top 4 to 5 players around the world. We do have a presence in the USA, in Europe, and also in China. And I think that, mostly within the EV charging hardware and software space, there'll be a couple of players on kind of a regional level, but I'd say even fewer on the global level.
All right, so your instinct is that in EV charging hardware market, there's going to be a shift increasingly to the consolidation. Is it a similar picture in the ChargePoint operator segment? Ton, I guess that's a question for you.
Yeah, I think what we expect is that, so on the short term, I think there's going to be even more of a scattered market. We see a lot of companies trying to get a piece of the market, and rightfully so. I mean, it's a big market with big outlook, so everybody tries to get a piece of the cake. But certainly, let's say shortly after that, there will be consolidation, as Austin also said. We also see that. And I think, for us, scalability is a big virtue, and also having a real mass asset base, because we also like to own these. So we're not a pure operator as such. We really like to own all of our assets as well. So yes, and there's where the money also comes into play. So I do think that money is going to be a big discriminator on the short to mid-term, to be able to be a real, in our case, pan-European leader, because we are not as ambitious as Wallbox is. Maybe we just focus on Europe first, because that's already a big market to play in. And so yes, consolidation will definitely come in the short to mid-term.
Now, you see Austin already mentioned software, but maybe you can talk about how you see things developing in the EV charging software segment.
I would say that one of the big difference in, for example, many other platform industries, which are quite dominated by the 2-3 players, I see still that we are a different ballgame due to the energy. Energy has a really close relation to national security. And for the moment, we are underestimating the impact of electric mobility to that topic. This means, in my opinion, that the tribes will be more in compared to, let's say, other classical platform industries due to the strategic security reason of nations. And therefore, I consider that there's more room in this game. Nevertheless, the obvious thing is that the consolidation happen, but not in the extent that we see in another classical platforms, 2-3 players.
I see it differently. I think we are in year 1, let's say it like this. This is the first time that we have more than 1,000 visitors of the HubCheck conference. So last year was the first time where eMobility really kind of was recognized by more or less everybody. So we are in year 1. We have the first consolidation, but actually just the very, very first one. And we have to consider what we look at. Electricity market, very fragmented. There will always be fragmented players. Hardware market, even that market is fragmented. You can't bring a hardware from the US to Germany or to Europe. It just doesn't work. Different standards and so on. Even software. charge point board has to be. Why? Because they are not aware about those many different VATs and taxes and whatever. So that fragmentation, I think, will still be quite a long while in the market, at least the next 3 to rather 5 years, depending on the different things. Even software is not so easy to scale over those things. So I think we will have some couple of global leaders who get the money now and who have the ability to grow in several countries. But there will be so many niches still possible in the next upcoming years because the market is so big.
Yeah, and maybe if I can, maybe to complement what Marcus said, because I think indeed it is different views. And maybe, look, the future can accommodate different views, that they will have, of course, some very large sales force, so to speak, and then some very, very successful like CRMs, more specialized, that will do their job until perhaps more consolidation in the future. But I think what is important is some of the financial choice, so the financial structure choices made by those companies can impact how much influence even the smaller players can have. You're looking, for instance, at the US company Nuver that is very much involved into putting in place systems, include V2G. They have made strategic decisions to connect with large infra funds effectively. I think it's 500 to 600 million capabilities of funding to absolutely increase large projects and therefore increase their projects, their overall influence. So it can be that players of that kind of scale can indeed decide to increase their influence with that kind of additional structure. So I think it's a complex play. It plays over different years, but there is certainly a way to, if you will, to prepare for the next step with possibly having the larger size or the best position in a few years.
Okay, so if we're talking about scaling up, maybe bigger isn't always better, but it's just it's about being better. So if we do want to take a look at what it will take to become a market leader in all of these different verticals of the e-mobility space, so what do you have to do? So yeah, maybe we can just go around the musical chairs. So Jussi, how would you describe the most important things that people in your segment need to pay attention to if they want to succeed in the coming years?
I think the equation goes with the solution intelligence, meaning that the impact must be within the technology, the solution provided, because that is IT makes it possible to scale that phenomena really widely. So uniqueness, of course, selling point where you have a certain capabilities which attract, which give something more. Like we have been concentrating lots since the first ideas to energy, electric vehicle, symbiotic relationship. So bringing something that can have a tangible impact, for example, globally, when we can help to increase the renewable energy and electricity production in the network, and while adding the flexibility for electric vehicles. So certain uniqueness there needs to be in place. Of course, other part is that when scaling up, the easy part is to do pilot, the first thing, but when doing serious operation in hypergrowth industry like we are and getting to, is a matter about also the really capability to structure the form for the next growth leap. What I mean is that, for example, today we are building the platforms and elements which are used in let's say 4 and even 5 years from now. And what it means that, for example, today we are operating 1,000 megawatt of rated power of chargers. And when this is 10-folded, 20-folded, it is becoming a remarkable part of energy. I will give you one example. Nuclear reactor can be 500 megawatts, and like that, 1,000 megawatt is a 2 nuclear reactor. Who would give the license of a startup to operate, let's say, 10 nuclear plant IT systems? But this is the grandiosity of the challenge the global leaders are going to face. They need to manage the equation and the security is really important and underestimated topic in the industry, in my opinion. That requires scale, that requires lots of investment, and I would say that is the equation how I see it.
And Markus, what about the vehicle to grid segment? So what will it take to become a leader in this segment looking ahead?
For me, in general, to become a leader is to have a great team and focusing on the customer. Out of that, you get the best product. And no matter if you're producing a charger or you want to thrive for vehicle to grid, certainly you need a special know-how, you need the financing and stuff like this. We currently influence regulatory bodies quite a lot to convince them that vehicle to grid will work. Actually, that lights are provided to some extent out of 20 Audi batteries without wheels on. You can find at the ORIF campus a little bit to the other direction, which we manage. And if we do not provide the lights here, we kind of earn money in the energy market. So you can see that vehicle to grid will come. Technology-wise, it's there. What we are lacking now is the regulatory framework. And this, as we had before, is different in every European country. Unfortunately, even as we are in the European Union. But the team and the customer focus on a good product, I think, is the key success factor at the end.
And what about the success factors for the CPO segment? Ton?
Well, I would say in general, be bold, think big. And you know what? I actually joined Allego almost 4 years ago, and I found a lot of people talking about the purpose of us being there. And you know, as a financial guy, I like another P word, which is profit or cash. So you know, you also need to grow up. And it doesn't make sense to keep hanging in a kind of purpose-driven environment. I like that discussion, but in the end, we also need to survive, because it's also a bit of a struggle for survival. And in our case, it really means, if you want to be a leader, you know, and everybody is a leader, because it's just depending on how you define the market. I also experience it's just a matter of size. Really, you know, for us, being able to manage tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of different charge points in different countries to serve every type of car is what it's really about, and that's what we're focusing on. So scalability next to a big bag of money.
And Austin, would you like to tell us your perspective on what it takes to be successful in your segment?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think a couple of the other panelists have already touched on it. Like Tom, I also like big bags of money. I think that's definitely important. You know, but one of the core tenets we have at Wallbox is to always follow the user. And this has a lot of different meanings, a lot of different nuances. But, you know, I think one of the first parts of it goes back to what Jussi was saying about the technology, right? And the technology that we have today isn't the technology that we're going to need 4, 5, 10 years down the line. And so we're trying to not only anticipate what the consumers, what the users need today, but also what they'll need in the future. So looking at everything from, you know, UX, UI, to making sure that we can deliver our chargers in 48, 72 hours, you know, no matter where they are. And in order to give, you know, the users the best experience possible, you have to set up the infrastructure. So this kind of goes back to what Markus was talking about with the team, making sure the team's in place, but also, you know, making sure that we have the proper facilities to meet the global demand of the EV market, right? So for Wallbox, we've made a point to vertically integrate all of our engineering and our manufacturing in-house, right? So this allows us to get certifications faster, to prototype faster, to go to the market faster. And I think in this, you know, rapidly evolving ecosystem where the technology is changing, the regulations are changing, you know, the certifications are changing sometimes, and you know, you need new certifications every year, right? So I think having a lot of this in-house is what has allowed Wallbox to get to where we are today, and will continue to be important moving forward, right? I think that's mostly it. Just to kind of, I feel like I stole 2 or 3 other people's answers, but
well, I think it's. I think it
up
makes sense that certain things are valid and useful in many segments. I think you always need a good team. You always need innovative technology. I think those things are true no matter what segment you're operating in. But I just find it interesting that none of you talked about something else that's very important for the health of a company looking at the future, and that is your funding strategy. And there are some observers who say that lots of e-mobility companies have just not done sufficient planning, and especially to get the scale that's going to be required to meet this accelerating EV demand if we're looking at 2025 or 2030. So, Dominique, is it true? Do you see that there are companies that they're just sort of floating on this wave of this excitement in the market and things are going great, but they're not really thinking in terms of dollars and cents or euros and cents of a strategy for the longer term of the health of their companies?
Yeah, well, there are companies at different stages, of course. Some of them are being created with some really new, innovative invention, and I think they are at a different place than those who have been there for 4 or 5 years. I think so that has to be recognized as well. But I think what is certain is that the keeping an eye on the slightly longer term is absolutely critical. And again, I think what is required of companies that will grow successfully in this market, I think the expectations now are much higher than before. It's looking at this from the outside of the companies. I think that in the typical days you had, if you're an entrepreneur, you go from point A to point B, you bring a company after 3 years, maybe to break even, at the very least kind of commercializing the innovation, having a nice team, I don't know, to 50, 100 people. That has been at some point the stage, and there was possibility to do the goal, and you could have done, of course, a lot more after that. But here, I think looking at the scale of what we're seeing in terms of growth, there's a lot of additional, I would say, qualities that are becoming necessary as part of those management teams. For instance, if you see these new source of capitals coming in, we mentioned the infrastructure funds, we can also mention maybe the pension funds that are now starting to look really closely at the market. They do not have a 2-year, 3-year time horizon. It's more like 10, maybe more, 15 and more. So I think that means that your management team financially and strategically have to plan and have at least to see how to manage with these type of period, maybe adjusting when things change, of course. So that's clearly one thing. And when you have situations where with the SPAC or other structures you can accumulate a war chest and then be able to consolidate more, then you have to be able to do that in addition to growing a company successfully. So you have to have this additional breadth and scale. So the dynamic range of what management team has to do is really increasing. And I'm not even mentioning as well I would say the demands of the stock market listed company that I'm sure that Ton and Austin are getting to know quite a lot, because that's also an additional thing. So at the end of the day, our company doing enough. It really depends where you are at your starting point. But for those who want to end up really in a significant position at the end, there's absolutely a lot to do, and especially to realize that, again, we are going to be in a market which is 15 times larger in only a few years from now.
So I'm curious to hear maybe some concrete examples. So what have your companies done to prepare financially for this exponentially exploding, growing market? So does anybody want to jump in and share with us some insights into your company's plans?
We draw the fundamentals for Virta 2011 in a paper defining the structure of the company, and started with the strategic cooperation partners. As the EV mobility was very far away 10 years ago, lots of long-term investors required. So strategic was a really good part of the equation. We gain traction, gain size. But latest round, we have been especially targeting to private equity investors. Why? The scale is growing beyond any strategic investors. There is no single strategic investor, maybe some few global companies, but otherwise we are growing faster than beyond any this kind of operational interest. So therefore, the best part is the private equity and especially technology drive. Why? Technology is, like I said, the basic fundamental thing which you can scale in the market. And we've been successful last time to close the 30 million round with private equity investors, Schultz Capital, Vertex, and Tesi last spring. And this has been really boosting our business and giving us the next level growth capabilities.
Anybody else want to give us some insights into your company's plans?
Perhaps, I think up to last year, more or less, everybody could be happy to find somebody to get financed. So it was for sure all the companies who survived now for 5 or 10 years like we, it was always a fight because you all remember how the market has been 5 years ago. We are, and I don't want to say that this, what we did is done by strategic planning from day one. We have the lucky situation as Mobility House that we always focused on strategic investors. For us, it was always important to have somebody who believes in our vision, means that you can do more with an electric vehicle than just driving, being an integral part of the energy world and earn money with that vehicle in the energy world by reducing CO2. So we started then with Daimler, we got Renault, we could convince international kind of infrastructure investors like Mitsui, and the latest one is a strategic investor. Dominique worked out hard on it. It's Mercury, it's a trading house where we get the trading competence we need in the energy markets. But to be also quite frank, this is, to a certain extent, it's always luck that at that time you find that investor. You can have a strategy on it, but if it works out, you don't know. But in the end, I'm quite happy, and I think it's a good advice to work with investors who not just give money, but also follow your strategy and believe in it, and also support you in good times and also bad times.
Yeah, if I may, I absolutely agree to that, Mark. So I think that's a fair point. We were lucky enough to, be able to partner. They own us, but let's call it partnering with Meridian, as Dominique mentioned, the French infrastructure investor who has a really long-term view, so 20 to 25 years on all of their assets, and that gave us the opportunity to, let's say, not be subject to short-term typical private equity windows of 5 to 7, maybe 10 years, but really, grow and think along with them on the business, and also experience the way that they finance their assets, which is a project financing structure. So we actually got a good picture on that, and that also helped us through the past couple of years. And now, we see that we need to accelerate with everything in front of us. So we made the jump to at least announce to go public for somewhere in the next couple of months. And that will, it's more expensive, but it will really enable us to give a big push on our assets in the market and be ready for the next level, because once this capital has been deployed, we see enough appetite and opportunities to go either through corporate or project financing structures as a next level way of funding us.
Yeah, and maybe just to finish off here, I think the question was about why companies haven't sufficiently planned for this shift and to meet the accelerating EV demand, right? And it's hard. I don't think any of us could have planned it. Kind of what Marcus was saying, it almost feels like there's an overnight shift. And unless you had found these forward-looking strategic investors, that some of my co-panelists have talked about, it was very hard to speak with venture capitalists and convince them about visions, right? Because they were looking at your current sales, your current tractions. There wasn't really an opportunity to say, but hey, look, the market is going to grow by 15 times, as Dominique said. right? And I think we were super lucky to bring on Iberdrola. In one of our recent rounds, we also brought on Wind Ventures, which is a corporate venture capital arm of Copec, which is one of the leading utilities in South America. And then we also brought on Cafe Innovation, which is some LPs like Michelin, Total, Airports du Paris. And so, these are, I think, the strategic investors that are really accelerating the market. And then we introduced this whole new theme, which was SPACs, right? And I think the reason why SPACs are so relevant for ESG companies is because they have that forward-looking element, right? They are allowing us to say, hey, the market's growing 15 times. Let's look at our forecasts in 2023, 2024, 2025, and put more of an emphasis around the valuation, looking at those outer years versus kind of current traction, right? Because for the types of companies that we have, that all of my co-panelists have, it requires a lot of capital. And the kind of financing space hasn't evolved quickly enough to meet the needs that of the market, right? So, I mean, I was reading a report the other day that was talking about there's been 84 SPACs in the ESG space just in 2021, which is about $90 billion in capital already committed, right? So it's a lot of money going to play, and I think this is the kind of scale that we're going to need to meet that accelerating demand.
But you mentioned a very important thing, the SPAC issue. We Europeans have to go to the US to get money. There is something wrong. Why can't we have something like this? Why can't we have investors here, and Dominique, this is your part now, that we do our business in Europe? Why do we have to go to the US? It's crazy.
Dominique, do you want to try and answer that question?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think what's really interesting is that when you look at the kind of the pool of global investors in the sector as well, and sometimes even the investors that are behind the SPAC that are coming by bringing additional capital in those special purpose acquisition vehicles, you realize that some of them are European. Again, not maybe the fund that are the actual SPACs. But having said that, the sector is coming to Europe as well. We will see a few. I think the secondary investors or those that are coming behind, there's already a lot from Europe. So I think what from our point of view, what we will see is that it's a sector that may take a bit of time, but it will be present as well in Europe, and it will not only be a US thing.
Hopefully.
And Marcus, to your point, I think there's an element of risk tolerance, right? And the US has always traditionally been a little bit more risk tolerant than European or investors in other parts of the world. In my last job, I was working at a company called Endeavor, which helps companies in emerging markets raise money. And it was the same thing. It was, hey, we need to do this whole education movement in order to give these companies the appropriate valuation, sorry, there's some, can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, okay.
So.
No, but there's this whole re-education movement that needed to happen in order for the investors to give the companies the adequate terms, the fair valuation, to understand, this is a technology that is needed in order to advance not just kind of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, but society, right? And similarly, if you look at the funding that's going into Latin America now or APAC region now following coronavirus, it's been an explosion. And I think this whole re-education movement is really taking place, and I do think that European funds and European investors will get up to speed quite quickly.
And now, Dominique, so just from a financial structure and partnership perspective, what would you say are the most important things that eMobility companies need to do to prepare for the necessary scale? So maybe just like the top 3 things.
Yeah, I think that's of course the most important thing is of course to see in light of the growth that you want to achieve, what fits in fact what your business model is. I mean, I think if you're primarily a software, let's say that you only do software, of course it's absolutely fine to focus mostly on the growth capital and what goes around it to develop fully for the next few years. If you are more of a asset heavy model, of course you may consider to have like a longer term investors that will be comfortable to invest into EV chargers of various types, for your hard assets. And if you, I would say, a full service company that offers that rollout systems, you can also have like a variety of investors. But I think in any case, I think what is important is to really consider the scale, the size of what we have in front of us to derive the best strategy by also using the best financial structure.
Gentlemen, we have a few more minutes left, so I would now like to open the floor up to questions from our audience. As always, we have our Mentimeter tool, so you can type in your question. Don't have to be shy. Hello, virtual audience. See, the red light means that I can look at you or pretend that I'm looking at you. So please do send us your questions. Use the Mentimeter tool. You know how it goes. And our panelists will do their very best to answer your questions or send us a comment if you like. And hopefully it'll pop up in my screen right over here in just a minute or so. Or maybe not. It was a lot more difficult when we used to, there we go. But we were just talking before, back in the olden days of the ICNC, where we had to pass a microphone around the audience, and then it was always somebody in the front asking a question, and the next question came from somebody all the way in the back. So anyway, this is a lot more efficient. Okay, so our first question is, what is, from your perspective, the right, quote-unquote, charging business model for what type of investor, VC, PE, pension fund, asset fund, corporate?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's quite related to your last questions and what we said, that there has to be some form of alignment between the business model and the source of capital. So I think we can reiterate what we said. I think saying that, of course, for the kind of harder assets, long-term asset, of course, pension funds, infrastructure funds will do quite well. And the corporate investing will sometimes depend quite a lot of what their strategy, what their strategic interest is. So that's in a nutshell, I think this is how you kind of best align the type of investors with the business models.
So in other words, it depends. It's the best answer, right? It depends. It depends. Okay. So we have another question. Someone asks, what is the time horizon to become profitable, in your opinion? It depends.
For example,
that's the short answer.
That's a short answer and a more detailed answer?
No, from kind of, we have three different business units, for example, Mobility House. One is that we kind of take care about charging for customers. That's profitable today. When it comes to smart charging or V2G, there we are a little bit more still in the R&D, and we have to pay off development costs. So that can't be possible in year, let's say, more or less one. But there are, if you're a hardware manufacturer now, you must be possible.
Yeah, and it is matter of choice regarding the growth. Of course, companies, many of on this stage, could choose to be profitable really fast, but that would mean that we would neglect the growth opportunities, and this is definitely not the time to look only that part. Of course, the fundamental model needs to be profitable in its core, but the multiplying it is the case right now. So the growth is taking the energy.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, for Wallbox, when you look at some of our legacy products in our traditional markets, when we analyze them on a business unit perspective, they are profitable. But to what Jussi said, it is about growth, and it's about launching new products and keeping up with innovation, right? We just announced our Hypernova product, which is a 350 kilowatt charger, which can charge your car in 15 minutes. We also have our Supernova charger coming to market later this year. And for Wallbox, we have chosen that path of growth in lieu of profitability. You can see our projections online in our investment deck. So, we predict to be EBITDA positive by 2023. And that is because we are pursuing this accelerated growth. So,
we have another question.
Same for us. Same for us. I think, in addition, we also last year actually restructured the company and really focused on key and core activities and regions. So not doing everything at the same time, but really focus on not only on what we're good at, but also at the same time make it profitable. And as can be seen in our deck, we expect to be actually positive on EBITDA this year. So, but again, that also required some restructuring and choices.
Okay, we have another question from somebody asking whether electricity companies in Europe are lagging behind in investing in eMobility.
Not sure if we want to have them investing.
So you mean you don't want to upset them if you to say something like that?
But as I said before, electricity is really very fragmented. There are just a very few players who are thinking global, like Enel or you mentioning Endesa before, or Iberdrola before. So there is E.ON. All the other electricity companies are more or less very fragmented. Fortum is playing a big role in the northern part, but not sure if they are the right investors, actually. We're really for global players. But they might finance a lot of more local players.
Dominic, how do you see
I think that's an interesting question. I think, are they behind or they're not? I think if you compare North America and Europe, I think in both cases you have some energy companies, electricity company which invested. But I think we come back to Marcus, what you said. I mean, I think are they the only, are they in some cases the only possible investors? No, because they compete with a lot of other investors, and ultimately they also have their own strategic reason, their own strategy to realize and say, well, do we want an EV charging provider ourselves, or do we want maybe to focus on, I don't know, maybe the B2C side of it, or for certain electricity company the B2B side of it? So I think ultimately it's related to strategies, it's related to strategy, and maybe the understanding and consideration that there is as well a lot of other type of possible investors, whereas a few years ago that was not necessarily the case.
So it's looking like we have time for one more question, and that is, should governments use CO2 EQ tax to create public funds to startups acting on EV renewables?
Perhaps I might start. I have a clear kind of view on that, especially when it comes to Germany. We are number one in renewables in an industrial country. We are number one in kind of, vehicle production. If we not make sure of bringing that together and creating global players, we do something wrong. If we need money from the US to get global players out, kind of out of US money and then even leaving Germany or Europe, then we do something wrong. However, the governments realize it. But this, I think, we have to achieve that we do something in Europe.
Any final thoughts from anybody?
Maybe the fundamental thing is the business changed the world. Of course, subsidies can push it forward, but the big changes are lucrative business, and of course, incentives and regulation now plays a big role. But eventually, it is really successful, scalable, efficient business that matters.
So everybody, that's all we have time for this panel. I feel like we could sit here for another hour, at least. But thank you, gentlemen, so much for sharing your insights. Thank you to our audience again for sending in fantastic questions. So thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.